Welcome to the Ranchonomics podcast, where we empower you to build a better ranch and transform your operations into a thriving business. I'm your host, John Haskell. Let's get started.
Bob Palmer, welcome to the Ranchonomics podcast. Great to have you here today. Always happy when we get to catch up. For those of you that don't know, Bob Palmer teaches a course we call Zone Rancher. He comes from the Sport Excel organization in Northeast Canada. Bob, good morning. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you. I've already been up for a while seeing some clients. So it just got off one from India and then another just got off with some ranchers from Colorado. So it's been a good morning.
Cool. Very good. And you are, I think, 3 hours ahead of us. So our early morning is about your midday, right? It works out great.
It is getting there. Yes.
Good. Well, I would like you to talk a little about your background, and then I want to talk a little about what you do with ranchers and with athletes and with business leaders. And then I'd like to talk a little specifically about our Zone Rancher course, if you will, on ranching.fyi. So why don't you give us some background? You have a wonderful story of what got you into this that I'd love to hear.
Well, I've always been a high performance guy who was an underperformer, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
I always was able to find those moments in my life where I was unstoppable. But the rest of the time, I was choking or whatever word you want to put in there. And it didn't make any sense. And so it was almost my life mission to figure that out and to move beyond that. And everything I saw leaders who could motivate me and get me, fired up and do crazy things I normally wouldn't be able to do. And there were others that I was a good average athlete with them. And again, what was the difference between kind of leadership? And those kinds of things were always some kind of a burning question in my mind. And at some point in my life, I did go to college and learned a systems approach, which really made the difference because I moved on to a sport called karate. Most of it was just, I considered it recreation and leisure, but it became a passion. And I just said, okay, well, I'm running up against the same roadblocks I discovered when I played hockey or played high school football. And I started to find some strategies, some tools that actually would help me break through. And these were strategies, very specific, almost business-like strategies versus trying to talk myself through it in a psychological way. And when I would put these strategies to work, I was using myself as a bit of a guinea pig. Why wasn't I able to get supercharged for a competition and kind of visualizing the old way of being nice and relaxed? Well, I went down in my basement. I said, okay, let's make a change here. And I supercharged myself. I applied a lot of adrenaline. I did things that might be considered a bit crazy even, but it worked. And I went, okay, this kind of mix of adrenaline and feel good. And I applied that to my karate and got my black belt. I now have a 4th degree in karate. I was able to win some tournaments when even my own instructor wondered where I'd come from. But it was just a matter of applying some of these principles. And at some point I said, hey, this has really worked for me. It must work for everybody. It's a pretty simple system. And that's where Sport Excel was born. And a young man from Georgia was introduced to me by his dad, the coach, and he was a kid that could break the world's record in practice and then would go 20% less in a competition. And for me, that was easy. Just taught him the zone. He literally beat up the world. He just got his 4th gold medal in Paris. And he's a young American man, and there's only a few others that have 4 gold medals in any one discipline. So that was exciting. And then another young man I'm currently worked with, he took silver in the same event. And a young lady I'd worked with previously got a bronze. So, even though I haven't worked with a couple of them for a while, getting them to learn how to drive their own high performance machine, and as I perceive the body to be, once they learn how to do that, they kind of take the keys and they do it on their own, which is the fun part of this program. And what I've done for athletics, I've also done for coaching and leadership. And that's how I found myself in Zone Rancher and developing this program, because it allows me to reach out to even more people than just a single athlete. Because I'm now working with coaches, Olympic level coaches who are working with their athletes and having some success doing it. in amazing ways.
So when you train the leaders, then your effect is able to be magnified down is effectively what happens, right?
Exactly. And it's not just training leaders to kind of in the nuts and bolts of how you run a class and that kind of thing. I mean, they know all that.
Yep.
What we're talking about is not leadership so much as high performance leadership.
Yeah.
And the difference there is that you now know how to elevate somebody.
Uh-huh.
And you know how to take leadership, and you can read people, so you know when they're taking leadership of you. So if you're a coach and you're getting frustrated by your athlete, they're leading you. And to learn how to overcome that is spectacular. There's a young man who is actually in Paralympics who I worked with as well. And, he's kind of a case in point. Because of his disability, he was very frustrated.
Yeah.
And helping him overcome that frustration, has led to him being able to go to World Cups and get a quota and be at the Paralympics. So it's kind of fun. I'll be watching that now.
That's pretty awesome. So there's some combination of things, and they're largely mental, correct? When you use the term choke early on, I think of myself at the times I have choked. I feel like I've kind of gotten in my head. I've gotten in my own way. I have kept myself from performing at my best at sort of a critical time. Is this entirely a mental process that you're teaching people?
It is. It's a way of changing perspective, of reframing things sometimes. And sometimes it's a way of reframing your physiology.
Yeah.
Most approaches to help people within leadership are, they have some strategies that they want people to think differently about leadership.
Yeah.
I found that you get far greater improvement in your performance in anything you do when you change your physiology. If you look at all the great athletes, the great leaders, you just have to look at them and you see a difference and notice the way they hold themselves, the physiology of how they hold themselves. But it goes beyond that. When you hold yourself like that and model other great leaders, which I teach in the program, you start thinking like they do, become more creative or more disciplined or more analytical, whatever role you want to take on, it becomes more a part of you at a much faster rate than if you just try to be positive and have affirmations.
Right.
And breathe, right? I mean, there are things that, they've been tried and by many of us in these training roles and they just don't work.
Right. And the great thing about the arena of sports, especially as you were experimenting and sort of figuring this out is you get to try it out in a situation where there is a scoreboard.
Yes.
That is kindly not life or death generally, although I think karate can be a little dangerous, but it's usually not that dangerous, but it gives you an opportunity to experiment at a point where you can really see whether or not it's working. You take those same skills, we see similar effects in business, right? But it might be a harder place to do the experiments just because it might be a little harder to measure the results.
It is and it isn't.
Okay, tell me more.
In any sport, let's go to the sport piece first. There's something called the leaderboard.
Yeah.
Right? And people just dismiss that as, okay, well, I got to work harder or something to get to the top of that leaderboard. But I break it down and show athletes, well, it's called a leaderboard for a reason. You have to be a leader to get to the top of it. And so that leadership piece comes in. And that leadership piece is not that difficult when you understand it. And if you can understand it in sport and clearly you have to rise above everyone else in order to win. But even on a team level, I had one athlete going to a World Cup and he was underperforming. He underperformed at the previous World Cup. So we're trying to figure this out and what's stopping him. And I said, well, you're hanging with the team, right? Tell me about it. He said, well, we have fun. It's camaraderie. And I said, are you generally better than they are, when you go to the range? And he said, yeah, way better. And I said, well, very likely you've given up your leadership to be with that group.
Right.
And you're performing that.
To fit in.
Right. So and all it took was for him to pull himself out of that group, spend more time preparing, and came back with a silver medal at a World Cup.
Right.
Right. So very subtle change because he had the skill. It was just he was giving up the leadership role.
Yeah. Interesting.
And on any ranch, in any business organization, there's a real difference between being a leader and essentially maybe a cheerleader and following along with your staff and being led by your staff.
Right.
And they're having a great day. Oh, you're having a great day. They're having a lousy day. Oh, what's going on here? I'm having a lousy day. And any leadership role, you can't come down here. You've got to be in this, what I would call the zone. And once you learn how to do that, all of a sudden, two things happen. One, you feel better. It's a good place to be. It's your moment of brilliance. It's what you've experienced in the past in the zone. But the other thing that happens is, and what you'll learn this in the course, that there's a natural inclination of people to gravitate to the most powerful person in the room.
Right.
And when they do that, hey, who's taking leadership, first of all? And then secondly, performance of your people in your organization is doubled, trebled, whatever. It's really neat how quickly that can happen. So when you said it may take a while, it can happen pretty fast. Depends on what your skill set is as a leader in general.
Yeah. Love it. Okay. So let's talk a little. We talked about choking. Let's talk about what that zone is. So we use this term a lot. That is the title of the course. Give a little insight into what it is, because in my mind, it's the opposite of the place where you choke, but that maybe leaves some doubt. So let's talk about that a little.
Well, typically in any business or like in any sport, there's this kind of notion that in order to perform really, really well, you have to concentrate on your skills and concentrate on just putting time in 10,000 hours, right? Skills and 10,000 hours.
Repetitions.
And then you will reach this euphoric level of confidence, right? And you'll see sometimes in telecasts of professional games, oh, did he ever lose his confidence? What just happened there? Well, that's nonsense, because the guy's been playing for 10 years and, you don't lose your confidence like that.
And everybody that plays at the top levels, I mean, they have the basic skills, right?
You have the skills.
It's not like that part is variable.
Yeah. What you do lose is the zone. You lose that flow, lose that ability to just perform without thinking.
Yeah.
What the zone for the first part of the program in Zone Ranchers is it's to get individuals to understand that zone isn't the result of skills and years and hours of experience. It's something that you can latch onto from your past. Everyone has great experiences. One gentleman who had just taken up the sport of trap shooting, for example, couldn't find anything in his life or any time when he had gone out shooting where he was in that zone. And I said, well, what do you do in your business? He says he's a violin maker. And you should have seen him. I said, well, tell me about it. He said, well, my violins are played all around the world in different orchestras. and his face lit up. I said, there's your zone.
That's it right there.
Well, it doesn't have to be in sport. No, it can be in any part of your life. So he had found a zone. Now he had to learn to sustain it.
Yeah.
So the next part of the program is really the process of how do you sustain that in the face of some of the stuff that goes on in your ranch or your life.
Yep. And when we talk about sustaining it, we're talking about sustaining it in my mind, one of the reasons this becomes so important is we face so many things that are in opposition to that, right? Which can throw us off balance, right? So changes in the markets, changes in the weather. We just had a weekend, or maybe a week long, I guess it was, seems like the weekend from hell with fires all over the place right near us, right? All these things will really throw you off kilter and get you to do things. And we all know this feeling, I think, where we do things under stress that are not the best response or not what we would have done normally, those sorts of things, and lead us to an outcome we're not very happy with. And what we'd like to be able to do is have ourselves mentally armored to the point where we can be in those very difficult, very stressful situations that maybe have more consequence than sport, and then make good decisions and be able to do things that maybe even are beyond, react beyond our abilities, not just at some fraction of our abilities.
Well, when you have that zone, it's now your benchmark.
Yeah.
And in the course, you learn that it's a wonderful place to live. And it's a wonderful sensation, but it's an indicator. It's a barometer.
Yep.
I'm there. Ooh, all of a sudden we got all this. We're trying to save the ranch house. We're trying to save maybe stock, whatever. I mean, it may not be ours even. It may be our neighbors. And that needle starts to go over and we go, whoa, I'm not going to be very productive if that happens. You bring it back and you're much more effective in what you're doing and the people you're dealing with and the leadership role you take. And so there's that side of it. But to do that, you need the toolkit to do it.
Which is the perfect segue. So we've all felt that zone feeling at some point. I think, all of us have that place where we've sort of performed even beyond our abilities. We've felt time stop. We felt that flow. In the course, what's so valuable is that is a maddening process to think about, that only happens occasionally. So tell us about the tools you've developed, which sort of help get us there consistently.
Yes. When your barometer plummets into, your no zone, as I would call it, you've got to get your zone back in order to be able to perform the way you want to perform and take leadership and those kinds of things. And so you learn in the program that a lot of that kind of collapse is due to physiology. And it's really a history of physiology all the time. I mean, you see some people who have gone through life and life hasn't been kind to them. And you notice they start to, sag and shoulders round in and clarity goes and everything's negative and there's literally kind of a cloud over their heads. Plus add aches and pains and from crunching and trying to breathe when your shoulders are rounded. Many of the strategies involve simply just learning how to retain the physiology that will help you stay in that zone. And so when a challenge happens, maybe a fire, your instant response is this rather than going back to some past trauma you had as a kid.
Yeah.
And the tools are all around, well, what is this physiology I need? Well, you can model it from somebody else. You can utilize fitness in a sense to feel what it feels like to go for a vigorous walk. But that's the kind of physiology you want to take into your meeting with your banker, for example, or your meeting with your staff.
Yeah, I love it. And that's the physiology that gives you the ability to lead, right? That's the physiology that makes other people want to sort of mirror up to your level, that draws your kids and that sort of thing to you, right?
Yeah. At one point in the program, I ask, who's leading whom in certain situations? And it's amazing when you start to identify that. And you go, okay, that I'm definitely being led by my kids or my father or my mother, or, if I'm going to run this operation, I've got to kind of take back that leadership.
Right. We've all heard the saying, the inmates are running the asylum, right? But sometimes it's not because they have the keys, but because they control the mood and the tempo and some of those things, right? Whereas when we take back that leadership role, not only do we have the keys, but we also have the ability to sort of change the tone and the feel of the whole thing.
You'll learn in the program that it's a good idea wherever you go to have an outcome.
Yeah.
Even a social situation, you can go off the rails if you let someone get off track and talking about their aches and pains. And it makes more sense to go, okay, we're going to go visit Joe and Julie, and every time we go, they get into conversations about, how negative it is on the ranch, how, difficult, taxes. I mean, nothing is positive. But on the sunniest day, UV's too high or something, right? And that's when you go, okay, what's our outcome here? Well, we kind of like them. Once we get past that, the negativity, things are pretty good. She's a good cook. Kids are get together, whatever. So you can set an outcome to better prepare for that and not allow the conversation to go down those rabbit holes.
Not get drugged down into the mud every time.
Exactly.
I love it. Very good.
I talk to a lot of people who struggle to fully implement the new wonderful things they learned from continuing education. You take Ranching for Profit, you go to a stockmanship class, or you take a marketing course, and you come home and you struggle to fully implement what you now know. Often the barrier isn't what you know, it's your own mind. Bud Williams used to tell us to get our mind right constantly. We know a lot of the right things, but implementing them often requires a new mindset. Fred Provenza describes conquering your own mind as the longest 6 inches, the distance between your ears. Sometimes you need to unlearn a few things you think you know. In the Zone Rancher course offered through ranching.fyi, Bob Palmer teaches us how to have an elite level mindset. Bob has spent his career working with Olympic level athletes, the military and business people, teaching them how to work in the mental zone where they are most effective. We've all experienced the feeling of choking. Many of us know that we don't perform at our best under pressure. Many of us have also experienced the zone as a fleeting moment of brilliance when we perform at our best. Bob helps prepare us mentally for those high-stress situations where the consequences are dire and/or the stakes are high. He teaches us how to practice correctly to get our mind right. He has developed tools that allow us to consistently perform at our best in the moments when we need it the most. Life in the zone is better. It's better for your business. It's better for your family. Join the next round of Zone Rancher through www.ranching.fyi and lead yourself and those around you to a whole new level.
Okay, so I think if the first half of the course is 8 weeks, right? It's basically 2 segments in the first, we'll call them the first 2/3 of the total course are each 8 weeks long. In the first 8 weeks, I think of it as, pretty much every week you're introducing a new tool for people. For me, some of the tools were more helpful than others, but I definitely found a suite of tools for myself in that first 8-week period that helped me kind of get to where I needed to be. The second, and I think of that first segment, the first 8 weeks, as being very much internal, which is me learning how to lead me, which is its own set of challenges, right? That is plenty difficult. And then the second 8 weeks, we really dove into how do I lead others? How do I lead in my family? How do I lead in my business? How do I lead with customers, vendors, that sort of thing? Do you want to talk a little about the separation between those two?
Yes. You said it really quite articulately. That is exactly what it is. It's the first part of self-leadership.
Yeah.
If you can't keep yourself in the zone, if you can't figure out the tools to set brilliant outcomes and know where the ship is headed, well, you're certainly not going to be a good leader, right? So understanding that first piece that people look up to you, and we'll be discussing something called mirror neurons, where we automatically copy people, and it's a leadership tool. So that first piece is building the you that wants to be the leader, that needs to be the high performance leader, not just the grumpy guy who's not happy, or the grumpy woman who's not happy, right? It's you decide what you want to be, who's going to be the head of that organization. And is it this guy or is it this guy, right? It's really sometimes that simple.
And for those listening, what you just did there is when you said this guy, the first time you sat up and were sort of bright and square shouldered and had a clear, sort of high vision. And then the second guy, your shoulders were slumped. You were slouched forward. You were, just obviously somebody that didn't have that big view.
And everyone can identify with that.
Yeah. Right. It's pretty easy social signal.
And we've all had bosses that or parents, boss, or, family members who were one of the two, right? Or somewhere in between sometimes, or both. So that first part is discovering that within you, that high performer, and learning how to stay there. And again, with an eye to leadership, where everyone else starts to join you in that culture of high performance.
Yeah. Sorry, I want to interrupt you there, because that's the part where most people have experienced the ephemeral visit, if you will, of the zone, right? The occasional visit. And what you're teaching is let's not only learn how to get ourselves there sort of on cue, but also how to keep ourselves there, right? So we are trying to convert the zone from an experience of, just a passing thing that happens occasionally and we don't really know why or how, to something that we can kind of put on on a clock, right? We can say, okay, now this is where I need to be, and I can get myself there. Is that fair?
That's absolutely right.
Okay, so it's on demand is the word I was looking for there. Yeah.
Yeah, zone on demand, and actually to make it a subconscious part of what you do. So no longer do you have to go, oh, I got to go into this meeting, get the zone back. It's who I am.
Yep. Here we are.
Ta-da. It's showbiz all the time. And some people say, well, that's insane, Bob. You can't be on all the time. Well, what they're mistaking is the amount of adrenaline you need to be in a specific type of meeting versus cracking open a book or having a family affair, whatever. There's a difference in energy level, but not a difference in zone.
And when people say that type of thing, I'm curious because I look at the different parts of my life, right? So I'm fairly busy. We have a relatively young business. I have 3 young children. I have a marriage. It's like, okay, so what part of my life do I really want to be underperforming in? Like, do I want to bring a crappy performance to work? Like, well, no, that wouldn't be good. Do I want to be a crappy dad? Well, no. Like, do I want to be a crappy husband? Like, no, I'd like to be a high performer in all of those things, right? And that sounds like a very daunting task, but to my mind, when you overcome the mental hurdles, when you make that process fairly subconscious, it's actually quite possible to be a high performer in multiple dimensions. I'm not going to say there aren't limits, but at the same time, I don't really have any parts of my life right now that substandard is really acceptable, right? I've cut out all that crap because I got too much other stuff going on. So learning how to make it.
It's way more fun when you can.
Oh, it is way more fun.
And we're now talking about part 2, which really that's where you learn that leadership piece. That's where you learn to be a leader in all facets of your life.
Yeah. Which is what we need for all of those facets, not only to go well, but in my mind, I need those so that I can actually keep them all going at the same time, right? Because when one of them really falls off the rails, then boy, it affects everything else.
Right. And what's nice about the second part of the program is you learn what to do when one falls off the rails.
Right.
You learn how to beef it up. You learn how to set in place a methodology, if you will, for compartmentalizing so that you don't get distracted by a myriad of things. You're able to totally focus on one thing, then move from role to role to role, if you will, and enhance them.
We all know of those cases where a bad day at work then subsequently creates a bad day at home, which subsequently creates just on down the line, right? Being able to break that chain when we need to is pretty important.
Yeah. And sometimes that, the older you get, the more responsibility you have in multiple areas. And if you're running a ranch, you're not only responsible for yourself, but you're responsible for your employees or your kids if they're working for you. You may be involved in your church. You may have responsibilities there. You may be involved in the community some other way, a youth group. You might have some responsibilities there. Run a soccer team. I don't know. You get more and more responsibilities, and now you're juggling more balls. Well, how do you bring those under control?
Yeah.
And part 2, you learn how to do that. You learn how to manage your busyness, if you will.
Yeah. Love it. Very, very good. All right, let's wrap it up here if that's all right. So again, 2 8-week segments. One of the things that one sort of internally focused, one a leadership focused. The other thing I wanted to touch on here briefly is we've had people come through the class as individuals and we've had people come through as couples. And I think we have made the observations purely anecdotal. We don't have any scientific research on this, but when couples take this class together, we tend to see better outcome. Do you want to visit about that just a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's because most ranches are run by a couple, whether it's on paper or not, whether they actually believe that. And by having both individuals within the program, they both learn the same tools. They're on the same page in terms of the zone. They're on the same page in terms of strategies to take leadership and to be supportive of their spouse. And that is an upward spiral rather than kind of a tug of war and kind of a downward spiral. So I think that's been the benefit. And it's not just been spouses. It's also been father-son.
Correct. Right.
And that's been neat to see where they start getting on the same page and can kind of identify some of their behaviors that are kind of being pushed back by their children, of their child and adult child, and change them and build a better structure within the family unit even. So, yeah, I would think that because it puts them both on the same page, that it's been hugely beneficial.
Yeah, we've had a few people that have given testimonials to that effect, that again, they've been able to reinforce each other. They understand each other's language around this. When one's off a little, the other can help them get back on track, that sort of thing.
And even helping them identify it.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, something will get into my head and my wife will nudge me, Bob, your posture.
Right.
Oh,
thanks.
Really?
Well, your zone really sucks today, Bob. What's going on? That's what everybody wants to hear, right? What's wrong with you? Not only bad physically, you're bad mentally. My goodness. Yeah, that's funny. Well, okay, so that's wonderful. So again, congratulations, because again, I know with the athletes that you work with, you work fairly closely. We've wrapped up the Paris Olympics here. I think the Paralympics are still going on, or are they also wrapped up by now?
They're just starting.
Okay, good. So it's always fun to see, athletes you work with bring home new medals. So that's very exciting. I have been very impressed as I have met people you have worked with, how they all have the same sort of basic impression, which is, oh yeah, this makes all the difference. And when I ask them, well, what exactly is it? They all say, that's funny, but it absolutely works. We have had some funny conversations with some of our early class participants who said, yeah, I wasn't so sure about that. But then all of a sudden I saw the change that was happening, and man, I need to get serious about this, whatever this voodoo mental stuff is. So that's always fun to hear. And I want to go back, and I've mentioned this before in context with you, but Bud used to always talk about we have to get our mind right. That was the most difficult thing. Fred Provenza talks about the longest 6 inches, people that are aware of who he is. The longest 6 inches being, between your ears. And that oftentimes the mental part of our lives is the most difficult part to overcome. And when Bud used to say that, it used to be one of the most maddening things he would say, because of course, get your mind right is easy to say. And when I first met Bob, it became suddenly clear that he had actually developed tools for that, and that getting your mind right was something that I could learn how to do. It wasn't just something I had to figure out every time on the spur of the moment when I knew my mind wasn't right. So I am very thankful to you for the things you were willing to experiment on and learn. I know that was a years-long process and probably fairly painful at times, but as we have been able to apply it in our lives, it's had wonderful impact. And I will say more than anything, I don't really have any areas of my life right now that I want to be crappy in. So more than anything, when I come home from work, I want to be the best dad I can. And the tools you give help sometimes wash off between the office or the whatever's gone on during the workday, and when I get back in the house and sort of be the full speed parent that I'd really like to be, and that I am happiest when I am. So I am very thankful for you, for your willingness to develop this stuff, put it together, and share it with others. So thank you, Bob. I appreciate that.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, you bet. All right. Well, we will talk more, Bob. There are a few things I would like to dive into in more depth that we did not cover today, but we will do that in future episodes. But I thank you very much for joining me and look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you, John. And it's been a fabulous relationship, and I, wish you the best as you move forward in your business, because, I think the zone has already made a sizable difference and
a huge impact. That's exactly right. Very good. All right. Well, you have a wonderful afternoon. And for those of you that don't know, that course is offered through ranching.fyi, which is a website. If you look that up, ranching.fyi, that is the website. And you can find more about the course there. So go there for more information. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John.
Thank you for tuning into the Ranchonomics podcast. We hope this episode helped you win today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with a friend.